Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're diving deep into a sound that, well, it really redefines what music can even be. We're not just listening to notes here, we're listening to time itself.
Right.
Our mission today is to trace what's been called the aesthetic of repetition and change. We're looking at minimal music, a genre that, and this is the paradox, doesn't really strip away complexity. It makes the simplest possible sound feel infinite.
And we're going to trace that idea all the way from its, revolutionary classical origins in the 1960s, right through to the digital landscapes of electronic music, ambient, even modern rock scenes all over the world.
The whole journey is about seeing how this music moved from, well, acoustic structure people in a room playing instruments to pure digital data.
But always searching for that same thing, that infinite fluctuation between silence and rhythm.
And that brings us to the core idea we're tackling. The whole point of this music was to get rid of traditional drama and emotion.
The kind of thing classical music was built on for centuries.
Exactly. Instead, it forces your attention, the listener's attention, entirely onto time and structure.
It's like you're asked to experience sound as a physical object, a geometric shape.
A physical object. I like that.
And to really get that, you have to start at the beginning, in the mid-1960s, with the American genesis of it all.
Which gave us two completely different ways of thinking about repetition.
Two very different ways.
So we start in 1964 with Terry Riley and his piece, In C. It's just wild to me that this piece is basically the DNA for, every long electronic track, every DJ set you hear today.
It absolutely is. It set the rules by kind of breaking all of them at once.
So what's the structure?
Well, the structure is 53 short melodic phrases, just little 1 or 2 bar ideas. But the key is each performer can repeat a phrase as many times as they want.
So it's arbitrary.
Completely. They decide on their own when to move to the next voice.
That freedom must have been shocking back then. But what does it actually sound like if everyone is sort of doing their own thing?
It creates this beautiful chaos. You get these totally unexpected overlaps, these polyrhythmic effects.
I'm picturing a traffic jam.
That's a great analogy. It's like a traffic jam where everyone's following the rules, but their own individual timing creates this wonderfully messy, always shifting texture.
A collective sound from individual freedom.
Within a very simple, fixed framework, yes.
Okay, so if Riley gave us freedom, then just 3 years later, in 1967, Steve Reich gives us the absolute opposite.
Strict clinical control. And that's the pivot. We have to talk about his piece, Piano Phase.
This is where phase shifting comes in.
This is the concept, phase shifting. You have 2 pianists and they're playing the exact same short melody.
Right.
One pianist holds a perfectly steady tempo. The second one, though, starts to speed up, but so gradually, so infinitesimally that you can barely perceive it at first.
So they're slowly slipping out of sync.
Yes. They diverge, they create this shimmering, blurry wash of sound, what's sometimes called zoning. And then eventually, they lock back in, but maybe a beat ahead of where they started.
That sounds incredibly difficult to perform.
It's painstaking, but that's the point. It's a controlled way to generate these subtle differences.
But doesn't that take the humanity out of it? If it's so mechanical, how does he create any kind of emotion?
The emotion is in the tension you feel as the listener. The sound is static, yet it's constantly in motion. You're waiting for that pattern to resolve.
I see.
And this precise system, this idea that the music is just the divergence and convergence of rhythm, that is the direct ancestor to every fixed loop in techno. The tiny mathematical difference is the entire song.
Fascinating. So from Reich's slipping time, we move to Philip Glass, who seems almost obsessed with freezing time, making it into something architectural.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
He elevated repetition into pure structural order.
The beauty of construction.
Yes, he was building sonic monuments. And the ultimate example has to be the 5-hour opera Einstein on the Beach from 1976.
5 hours.
5 hours. And it's not a narrative opera. It's just a huge layered soundscape using voice, organ, violin all to draw these geometric patterns in your mind.
So how do you structure something that long and that repetitive without it just becoming boring?
Well, he used very specific techniques. The main one is called the additive and subtractive process. It's basically modularity.
What does that mean in practice?
So instead of just repeating a 4-note phrase over and over, he might play it, then add a 5th note, then repeat that 5-note phrase, then maybe take away the 1st note.
So the fundamental block is always growing or shrinking.
Precisely. It constantly adjusts the texture without any big dramatic shift. And crucially, for Glass, the sound is all about the pulse. The melody is secondary.
The rhythmic engine.
The heartbeat of the music becomes the whole focus. It's this relentless, sustained rhythm that lets you just lose yourself in it.
And that pulse, that sustained rhythm, it definitely didn't stay in the opera house. You can hear it so clearly in later genres, especially post-rock.
Oh, absolutely. Bands like Tortoise, Sigur Rós, they build on that glass scene idea. They use repeating motifs, not for a verse-chorus song, but to build these enormous soundscapes.
These slow, patient crescendos.
Yeah, that function just like the slow rotation of some huge sonic building.
And this is really where we see these acoustic ideas start to bleed into technology. You take Riley's freedom, Reich's phasing, Glass's pulse.
And you filter it all through an 808 or a 909 drum machine.
And that's where minimal music finds its true digital home.
Exactly. But now you have a new philosophical problem. A machine loop is perfect. So how do you keep it from sounding dead, from sounding static?
The micro differences.
The micro differences. A tiny tweak on a filter, adjusting the decay on a hi-hat by a few milliseconds, that's what adds the life back into it.
Let's start with Detroit. I mean, the contribution from Robert Hood, Jeff Mills, Derek May.
Yeah, it's just immense.
They saw this rhythm as something almost spiritual.
It was. In Robert Hood's album Minimal Nation from 1994, that's just required listening, he proved you could use the most basic parts of the 909, a kick, a snare, a hi-hat, to create this unbearable tension.
Right. Take a track like Rhythm of Vision. It's a simple 44 beat, maybe 128 BPM. The only parts are a kick, hi-hat, snare, and a sub bass. So where does that extreme tension you're talking about actually come from?
It's not coming from a new melody or a big breakdown. It comes entirely from tiny, tiny filter changes and rhythmic dropouts. Hood is meticulously sculpting the texture of the sound.
So the tension is psychological.
Completely. You're always waiting for the pattern to resolve or complete itself, but the changes are so subtle that the resolution is always just out of reach. You're forced to listen inside the loop.
Okay, so Detroit is all about that sharp, rhythmic knife edge. But then Berlin takes that same minimal idea and just dissolves it in atmosphere.
That's the late 90s movement, Basic Channel, Maurizio, the duo, Moritz von Oswald, and Mark Ernestus. They basically invented a genre, dub techno.
And their technique was all about dub echo.
Heavy, heavy use of dub echo. Delayed reverb, low-end repetition.
And how does that manipulate your sense of time differently than what Hood was doing?
Well, Hood abstracts rhythm, right? Basic Channel expands space. The repetition and the echo create this huge cavernous sound.
And notes have tails.
Exactly. They're not just notes, they're events with these long, decaying trails that stretch out. By focusing on that decay, you're basically slowing down your own internal clock, waiting for the echo to fade before the next beat hits. The sound just feels vast.
Speaking of stretching time, we have to talk about Brian Eno.
Of course.
His 1978 album, Music for Airports. This is the birth of what people call static minimal.
Yeah, and Eno wasn't making music for a club. He was making sound that you could, in theory, ignore, but that would subtly shape the environment around you.
And he did it with asynchronous tape loops. What does that mean?
It just means the loops weren't synced up. He let them run freely, so because they were always slightly out of phase with each other, they would accidentally create these new overtones, these unpredictable harmonies.
So it's minimal music driven by chance.
By analog accident, yeah. The sound changes so slowly, it just expands your perception of time through this unpredictable, sustained texture.
And then this idea makes the huge jump to modern pop with Radiohead, Everything in Its Right Place from 2000.
Yep. They took that Reich and Eno idea and filtered it through digital technology.
So it's not accidental tape loops anymore.
No, now it's digital samplers, vocal loops, synth loops that are intentionally shifted out of phase. And the point here isn't rhythmic tension. It's to create this feeling of emotional separation, this dreamlike quality.
It almost sounds like the loop is dissolving or breaking away from the rest of the song.
That's it. It gives you this impression of a sound that's always breaking down but then rebuilding itself just slightly off-center.
Yeah.
It's using minimal structure to create a feeling of, existential unease.
That's a huge leap from the mathematical purity of the 60s.
It really is.
So if Detroit gave us tension and Berlin gave us atmosphere, what happens when this whole idea meets Japan's, celebrated focus on detail and data?
Ah, the Japanese intersection. This is where it gets really refined.
And rigorous.
And rigorous. You have to start with Isato Mita way back in 1974. He used synthesizers with this incredible precision to reconstruct classical music, like his version of Clair de Lune.
So he's focused on the sonic space.
The meticulous sonic space. He's using these tiny modulations in pitch and tone to create what you could call electronic persistence. That painstaking detail, you can hear it directly in later ambient techno.
And then we get the leap into pure data with someone like Ryoji Ikeda.
Yes, his work Dataplex from 2005 is probably the endpoint of digital minimal.
What's he doing?
He's using pure frequencies, raw numerical data, and sounds that are often right at the edge of what we can even hear, like bursts of ultra-high frequency tones.
So he's stripping music down to just math.
To repetition and segmentation. You are literally listening to data translated into sound. It's an intense, very intellectual experience.
But the Japanese scene wasn't just about pure data, right? It was also incredibly diverse.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look at the collaborations between Alva Noto and Ryuichi Sakamoto. That's an electroacoustic fusion.
So you have the organic sound of a piano.
Right, against Noto's clean digital glitches and precise loops. The music lives in that tension, the space between the human touch and the perfect digital repeat.
A very different feeling from Ikeda's pure math.
Totally. And then you have someone like Rei Harakami, who made this warm, lo-fi electronic music. For him, repetition isn't about tension or rigor. It's about comfort, about texture.
A counterpoint to the clinical feel.
It's a very human-centered approach to repetition. And then there's Asa Cheng and Jun Rei, who use minimal rhythm to specifically interact with the human voice.
How did that work?
The rhythmic loops are very static, very contained, which allows your ear to focus entirely on the tiny irregularities of the human element, the voice, the percussion. It creates these minute human-scale phase shifts.
It's incredible how those core ideas from the 60s, manipulating time with repetition, are still driving things 50 years later. They're just being translated into new tools.
From tape loops to pure data.
Yeah.
And if you synthesize that whole journey, from Riley's 53 free-floating phrases to Ikeda's rigid, segmented data, you see the history of minimal music is really just one continuous experiment.
From analog to digital.
From the human body to pure code, but always asking the same question about time and perception.
So after this whole deep dive, what does this genre ultimately teach us? What's the big takeaway for someone listening?
I think the core insight is that minimal music isn't just less. It's not about stripping things away. It is, I think, fundamentally the art of discovering the maximum freedom within restriction.
Finding the biggest possibility in the smallest unit of sound.
Exactly. Finding the deepest psychological effect within the most constrained system.
And as we're sitting here now in a world that is just saturated with digital repetition, from the code running everything to the looping clips on social media, this music suddenly feels more relevant than ever.
It really does.
So here's the final thought. If minimal music was designed to make us listen to time and structure itself, how is the constant presence of these fixed digital loops affecting our own subconscious perception of time today? What subtle phase shifts are we all experiencing every single day without even realizing it?
That's something to think about.
That is something to think about until the next deep dive.